Earlier this week, Senator Orrin Hatch announced that he would not be running for re-election for an eighth term in the Senate. He is the longest-serving Republican senator of all time. Actually, has been serving in the Senate for longer than the lifespan of 60% of those who currently occupy the state of Utah, which he represents. And one of the main reasons why his race or his potential for a re-election bid was so notable was due to the idea that Romney, the former Republican presidential nominee, would try to run for the seat and win it and then oppose Trump once in office. And his withdrawal has basically solidified that that's more likely to happen. Let me say hello to Winter Fresh. Give him a little shout out. So, one of I have kind of I have to give a context. Back on March 3rd of 2016, in the midst of the Republican primary, as Trump was leading and gaining and just starting to have his rise that would ultimately lead to him getting the nomination and subsequently winning the election. We know how history went. But it was March 3rd of 2016, and Romney delivered a speech criticizing Trump, warning against his election. You know, they were just predicting he would fail. And despite the fact that it turned out to be false, because Romney did win, Trump did win, it's probably my favorite speech of that year for the reason that it showed this kind of idea that Trump was this figure who was so divisive that even members of his own party were torn on him, and in some cases could make the case for why he shouldn't win that could later be used against him in the general election, which was done with the Clinton campaign. Now, that propelled Romney in my eyes because I thought, oh, well, at least he's, actually speaking from the heart or whatever. But after Trump won the general election and they were making out his cabinet as part of the transition, he met with Romney as he considered him for the position of United States Secretary of State, which ultimately went to Tillerson, as we know now. But even back then, I one of the points that people were making that I completely agreed with was this idea of he was bad when you thought he couldn't win. Now that he's won, you want to show some kind of unity for the sake of getting a job. And after getting turned down for that, it almost makes this thing where you start to wonder, is he just getting this so he can be a pain in Trump's side, for as long as he's in there? And there are those who are also claiming he might enter the Republican primary. If he does, he'll get blown away, because his positions, say what you want about Trump, but there was a certain bombastic nature to where you had people listening to ideas, no matter how preposterous you thought they were, or that we collectively thought were insane. They still were conveyed in a way that made those who weren't agreeing with it versus those who were agreeing with it come together and listen and hear it out, and then draw their own opinions and conclusions. Now, another theory that's been floated is that Romney will hand the seat over to his son after his term is up in another 6 years, which I could see that happening because they kind of have that political family thing going on. But I really want the people who live in Utah who can actually vote and stop this from happening to stop it from happening. Let me just forward it. I am no fan of Trump. I am no fan of the Democrats. I am no fan of the Republicans. I don't like the majority of either party. I have a select few number of politicians on both sides that I have some high view of. Romney is not one of them. And it's sad because I'd like to go after him for his positions, which I disagree with wholeheartedly, but it's more so directed at this idea of I'm going to reinvent myself and flip-flop, which is something that ended up hurting him during the campaign, the 2012 presidential campaign, this idea that he doesn't have any surefire positions. And that's something people in that state should think about. Whether or not I want this person whose views changed from 3 years ago to 2 years ago Yes, our Democrats do the same thing. Let me respond to these comments. Winter Fresh says, I remember there were so many Trump jokes, and I remember thinking, why all this animosity? Surely he's not all bad. Hey, we all learn things. Let me say hello to Splendora Gaming. Elder Fabulous says Utah is filled with nothing but Mormons. Good luck dethroning Romney. Well, you have to understand something. A lot of times, groups back people that represent them. You had the majority of African Americans voting for Obama. You had a majority of women voting for Clinton. Hillary, not Bill. I think we can understand that. So it's more so a kind of a pride thing than anything else. And a lot of people aren't going to do the research to try and look up his history in the last couple of years, and make the determination I've made, which is that you don't know what to really believe when it comes to him. And that's not good when you're trying to gain the trust of voters. But it's the point you're making is well taken. And I do think if he runs, unless the Democrats pull some miracle or they have someone over there who can walk on water, he's definitely going to end up being the next senator. And I really wish that you could just have people say to themselves, what changes have we seen? And really, if this idea was floated around, you'd probably see every member of Congress removed from office. But to ask themselves, do we want to support people who literally are using us as a jumping off point to run for something else, or to just add to their list of accomplishments? Because it should be notable by now. I think a lot of people have caught on. Most of these politicians, whether they're your senators, your governor, your representative, your assemblyman, whatever, they're not doing anything for you. They serve those that stick the cash in their pockets. And it's gotten to the point where a lot of the ones on the local level, are that way. Okay, Splendor Gaming says, not sure what Romney's chances are, but I'm not all that trusting of him. He's not as bad as Harry Reid, though, also a Mormon. Well, let me ask you this, Splendora. Who do you think could beat Romney in that race? I can't think of the names of any other candidates running in that Senate election over there. So it's this thing where even if you don't think he's that great of a candidate, because people have this idea of, well, this person doesn't strike me as charismatic or having charisma or having a platform or anything else. The people they're running against typically either don't have any of those things I just described, or they don't have the same name recognition. So, for example, when you have a person that has been a presidential nominee and they say, hey, look, I want to represent your state, you are going to have people that say, oh, yeah, I remember him. Let me go vote for him. Okay, Elder says, I don't trust politics or religion, and when you have both in one person, well, LOL. There are good facets of, I think, both of those categories. They've been manipulated and tampered with to such an extent that the animosity toward them, I understand. Well, Splendora, my problem with that is the other candidate we don't know of. So, for example, I'm sure there's someone else running on both sides, but I can't think of their names. Can you? And you've seen Trump's record of endorsements since he's been in office with that Alabama race, first with Strange and then with Moore and then with, was it Gillespie in Virginia? So I don't think his endorsement is really going to be the major determining factor here. I think it will be a detriment to the person he endorses. So maybe he should endorse Romney to mess him up. Joseph Smith resurrected could not defeat Romney in Utah, says David Setchell. Okay, that's funny. But I didn't want to make this a thing where I just made the case for why he shouldn't be, the winner of that seat. I'm kind of disturbed that people and this is what's sad, that there's so many individuals in Utah that have brains in their heads, but they're not going to take the time to go read up on any of this stuff. You have to go out and the Democrat would have to run some campaign where he just said, hey, look, Romney did this, Romney did that, Romney did this, Romney did that. He tells you one thing, he does the other thing. I mean, if you ask me, who are the top 5 politicians where you could just to think to yourself, who more to you than anyone else who's ever ran for office do you think of when you think of a person who said one thing, then either did something else or said something else? Romney would be in the top three at least. It would be him, Hillary, and maybe Obama. Trump's been making his way in there too. I mean, I really, people think when you're into politics and history as much as I am that you have this idealism about the people who hold these offices. I'm very much aware of their ineptitude to do anything that serves their constituents. My stance is there are a few that sometimes are able to break away from that bad habit, and they should be elevated, while these ones that have been the presidential nominees over the course of the last couple of decades need to be ousted. And that means, not having their word taken seriously, not having their viewpoints, believed or otherwise allocated. Okay, Splendora says Virginia is more blue state than red. That race was not very likely to begin with. Yes, Trump won Virginia, but I don't think Republicans win there that often. Oh, that's true. Well, I think if you in any state, if you get the right factors, you could probably flip it that one time. But some of these states, and I'm agreeing with you, some of these states just will go one party forever. South Dakota's had nothing but Republicans as governors since I think the late 70s. They have the longest record of just one party staying in control. So I understand what you're saying. But explain the Alabama thing. He endorsed both of the candidates in that. Two candidates in that, and they both lost. Okay, Elder says, I highly doubt residents in Utah would even listen to those counterpoints. Mormonism would spoon feed them that God is choosing Romney. Okay, well, no, but is that really the fault of Mormons? Because I've seen other religions say, or people who were also religious that ran for office go, yeah, I ran for this because God chose me to run. God selected me. The Lord called upon me to take this office. I've seen that. And there's actually, if you don't believe me, I can provide you with, there's a video example where it's just about, I think, 3 or 4 Republicans from this last election cycle that said God picked them to run for this office. Apparently didn't pick you to win. So, that's amusing to me. Yeah, I understand the collective mindset. I'm definitely in there with you in terms of my comprehension of it. One other thing I want to point out is that it's so frustrating when the only choices you have are keeping, forget Hatch's age, someone in there that's been in there that long and that's done very less and less as time has passed, or the person who is going to take that office and use it for some other means. Think to yourself, what is Romney going to propose, particularly having to do with the state of Utah? Is he going to, reform Salt Lake City and whatever other, I'm not familiar with their landscape, but just tackle actual issues of the state? Is he going to go on some kind of tour and show the people there he's interested in what problems they're having? Splendora says Alabama was the only upset victory for the Democrats. I don't agree with Moore's politics in many cases, but that was not a fair competition. A bunch of allegations were thrown at Moore. I think it was a combination of the allegations and just his positions. They were, yeah, Splendora. I you don't have to tell me about the timing of that. I thought it was suspect too. We're gonna wait 30 days before the election to come out with all these charges after you've ran. Moore made a really good point about, I've ran all these campaigns here and now people have a problem with me. So I'm not one to just go and put a blanket and say, yep, he did that. I can understand the counterpoint to what those charges were made against him, but I do think they were a factor in the loss as well. And what I don't get about him is, that that seat is up in another 2 years, but he doesn't want to concede. Why not just concede the election and run again for the next one? That's the good thing about a special election. You don't have to wait as long as the regular ones. In this case, Sessions was already halfway done with that term when he got tapped to be Attorney General. Okay, what else is here? Alright, so if that's everyone's question or comment, I will begin my closing statement. Yeah, I think he's going to win. This wasn't me, and I wanted this to be clarified. This was not me saying, yes, if I just go out and make the case for why Romney shouldn't be the next senator from Utah, they'll listen to me. Oh no, I knew well and good that there's likely going to be a tuning out or making of, excuses for why it should be him. So I'm just this was just me voicing my, giving some context and history. Okay, so Splendora says many of the accusers had ties to. We've been over that. I get it. I understand. So I thank those who came to watch this. I kind of had, admittedly, a bit of a fear or reservations about just doing things political because, I mean, I saw the stuff with the Palestinian exodus where I couldn't even get 15 views on that. And it's only annoying when you think of the fact that with everything else, including this, I just go and read a little bit of an article, whatever. But that I actually sat there and tried to put all the results of that event, then try to, in a chronological way, factor in, what were the causes, how is this relevant, and just, a handful of people tuned into it. So that was a symbolic rejection of my efforts. That's not to say that I'm upset with the people who did see it. I just wish that things in which I put more effort into were able to, get involved. And the elder says, I get that. Most guys are more concerned about their love lives than the state of the world. Yeah, and it's sad because with that, with the Exodus, that's something that happened 70, almost 70 years ago, and it still impacts that group of people. And look, I understand I don't want to read or some book or watch a documentary. That was 2 minutes. Look, they can watch an hour-long stream about me talking about whatever, but not that in 2 minutes. Okay, David says the overall political landscape is the sum of all the political voices. You should totally talk about your political views and perspectives. I'm not necessarily against doing that. It's just my problem is when I try to speak on something with, I guess, a level of knowledge, I typically go out and seek the information. Some stuff I pick up easier than others. I had a script for the Exodus thing, and it was done that way because I wanted it to be concise, because I figured that would entice people to just check it out and say, you know what? I don't really know that much about this topic, but it's only 2 minutes, and I waste 2 minutes all the time. So let me just go and see this. So it's a little frustrating, but I deal with it. I'm very satisfied with what I have right here, because I figured if I put those up as the other ones, as just 2-minute segments, it would think that that's just the time it takes for audience. Yeah, I thought the same thing, but I figured if I put it up as a video and not a live stream, it would be less likely to derail. Like, this is kind of derailing a little bit. It still would just be to the point. Here's what this is. Here's what it did. Significance, and close out. So that was lame, but I think Romney is going to win. I think he is going to sit up in the Senate and do nothing for the people of that state for probably for the next 2 years, run in the primary, get stomped, maybe finally abandon his ambitions. What I don't get about them is that he can do the same thing Trump did, but actually live up to it. I mean, if you're from that high up financially, and you have nothing to lose, why not just say, hey, look, I want to get us out of all these ridiculous wars. I want us to, be more focused on ending the plight of the homeless than talking about the continued group of LGBT in the military. Who cares? You have people starving and living in cardboard boxes. Just there's so many things he could use his position for, even as someone who's not in office, he just doesn't do. And all these politicians, seemingly, if they're not coming out to criticize someone in office only show up to give a speech or to run for something else. I'm just so tired of it. I've seen it with the ones in my own state of California, and I'm seeing it more and more at the national level as time goes on. So thank you for watching. Have a good day.